that's better. Now I get sorted.
Oh, yes.
Just move in a bit and I'll move back a bit.
If you turn it to angle a bit.
Yeah, but I'm going to be twisting my neck. I'm going to be like this, so I'm all right. You come in, what you can do is to get it.
And this lockdown is long forgotten and ancient history and whatever. I think we should have one coffee morning or afternoon where we all just meet up together in the same room and have some cake or something.
Oh, Adrian, you're talking sense now.
At last, Sharon, at last. Yeah. I'll just give people another minute.
Things haven't changed. We still respond positively to cake, Adrian.
So who knows, after lockdown, they might put us all on diets, rationing the nation.
Might need it.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Has anyone lying snow left tonight?
Sorry?
No snow.
Yeah, we've still got a little bit left, like a bit of a surprise this morning, but because it was pouring with rain at 4:45, but snowing by 6:30.
Oh, wow.
Very good.
Oh, gosh.
Where are you, Elizabeth?
Yorkshire Dales, Dale, where the cheese is.
Yeah. Very nice. It's high, isn't it? Mm.
Get there.
Yeah.
No down the left.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, hey.
Oh, yes.
Were you there? Put that back up there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It is very good to see you all again. I think we'll make a start. There might still be one or two people who will join us. Keep popping into the waiting room from time to time. And I think so as we can pack as much in as possible, we won't delay. Thank you for giving up another Thursday evening to come and look at the detail of Mark's Gospel. I hope that you're enjoying this as much as I am. And at least with the recording, you can press pause and listen again as we try and get through so many different parts of the Gospel as we move through together. So thank you, Adrian. Thank you for all that you bring to us and for sharing your passion for the Word of God with us.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for being here and for just being a part of our time together. I really have enjoyed it. I think it's come through and I really do enjoy it. I'm going to ask James if he will just mute everyone's microphones now, just so that we start with them all off. And then, of course, if you need to speak or you want to speak or you want to raise a question or you want to interject or something, then please do go ahead and do that, because so much of the value of our time together comes in the questions and in the interaction.
You're muted, Adrian.
I'm muted after that.
No, you're not muted. Everybody else is.
Oh, okay. Thought I have to start from scratch. This is our journeying with Mark, a story of us trying to be faithful to God and following Jesus and learning along the way that discipleship is the only form of faith in Jesus Christ. This is our story as we journey. We've learnt along the way, I'm going to run through it quickly, 2 keys to understanding a text. One is the context, which determines the meaning. The other is the genre, the type of writing, and that determines how we respond appropriately to the text. Gospel is a particular genre of writing. It's not biography. It's not intended to just portray a biographical story, nor is it supposed to just be history. Of course, it includes biography, it includes history, but it is a genre all on its own. And everything that we need to know is included in the story. Mark hasn't excluded anything from the story, thinking that maybe, Matthew will tell us about that later, or Luke will tell us about that later. Everything that he felt we needed to know to understand who Jesus was and what it was going to mean to follow him, he included in the story. Everything with one small exception, and that being what the things that he assumed the reader would know because we shared a culture with him. So every bit of detail is important, and the key is always to ask, what does it mean? When we read a story in the Gospels, the key question is always, what does it mean? Part of our understanding is related to the context, and so it's important to understand the geography of the Near Middle East in the 1st century, although much of what's happening now in the second part of the story is really just Jesus traveling from Galilee down south to Jerusalem in Judea. And so it's not as key as in the later parts, as in the earlier parts of the story. The other key to understanding much of what's happening in the stories is to understand the division between honor and shame, and to understand how important that is in the telling of the story. We've dealt with that before. So this is the story, and we're gonna just talk a little bit before we dive right in, because I think I gave you some homework last week and asked you, just gave you a bit of a clue as to where we were going to start this week. And so has anyone found out anything about the Timaeus that they can share with us? Do you know what it is?
Plato wrote.
Plato wrote it, top of the class, right. Anything else we know?
It's about a creation story.
It's related to a creation story, yes, that's true.
It contrasts the real and the copy.
It contrasts the real and the copy, yes, or the perfect and the imperfect reflection of it. Yeah, very Platonic thought there, yes, absolutely. Anything else?
It's influenced both Western and Middle Eastern thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, there are parts of our thinking that are just so deeply Platonic that actually when we start thinking about it, we can't get our minds around it. One of those things is this whole idea of heaven and earth being separate. And that really was a Platonic thought introduced in that time, which was quite different to the thinking before, which was that the spiritual and the rest were so deeply interwoven as to be inseparable. And Plato comes with this idea, no, there's a place where everything is perfect and everything in earth is just a sort of a dim reflection of that at best.
And it integrates both philosophy and mathematics.
Say again?
It integrates both philosophy and mathematics.
Yeah, and spirituality, and asks great questions of us. But so the Timaeus was a very, very famous play by Plato. It was actually a sequel to Plato's most famous work, which was the Republic. Okay, and it was written between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and at the time of Jesus was the most popular play. It was performed all over the Roman world. And that means most likely it was performed at the Roman amphitheater in Sepphoris, which is just 4 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. After the Bible, the Timaeus was the most widely read book of the Middle Ages. And in the 4th century, Aristotle took up an entire career-long research project just to try and understand what the Timaeus was about and what it meant. It was a hugely, hugely influential book. Bartimaeus, I would come across in chapter 11, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Well, just a few background things that we need to notice there. This is not a real photo of him. Timaeus is not a Jewish name. Bartimaeus is not a Jewish name. But typically in the gospel genre, Bar refers to a similarity, a likeness, an affinity, rather than to a genealogical or a genetic connection. And Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, would be in Aramaic sound like this: Bartimaeus, Bartimaeus. And that repetition, particularly in gospel writing, is going to be significant. All the detail is important. And particularly in this case, because if we've journeyed with Jesus, through Mark's gospel, every other time someone's been healed, they haven't been named. So why is a big deal being made out of Bartimaeus' name in this case? Shall we jump into the text and have a look? This is Mark chapter 10, in few verses, Mark chapter 10. They came, I'm going to ask you the questions I always ask, okay? What do you notice? What seems strange? What seems unusual? Those sort of questions. What does it sound like Mark's saying? What do we think this is about? Okay. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples, Jesus and his disciples, and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed Jesus on the way. What do you see? What do you hear? What's strange? What's unusual? What do you notice in this passage?
I noticed that Jesus only spoke. He didn't touch Bartimaeus in any way. He only said, "Go, your faith has healed you."
Right? Yeah. Okay, that's quite a good observation. In fact, Mark makes a little bit more of that, doesn't he? He tells us explicitly that Jesus makes no move towards Bartimaeus. Jesus stands still and says to them, "Tell Bartimaeus to come to me." And then as you rightly say, there's no indication that he touches him or some of the other things we've seen in some of the other healing stories. Yeah.
He calls Jesus a son of David. He must have some knowledge of his beginnings in this life.
Right. And Helen's picked up on the same thing. So in terms of some of the conversations we've had before, what is the image of son of David? Who was David? Start there. That's easy.
King of Israel.
Did you hear that?
King of Israel.
David was the great transformative king of Israel who'd, in their mind's eyes, at least transformed them into this great nation. So to call him son of David is to follow in the footsteps of that earlier conversation of the great Messiah on the white horse who's going to come and free us and throw the Romans out and install our own king in their place. That's the son of David language that Bartimaeus uses. Yeah. But there's a conversation that happens then between the son of David and Bartimaeus.
I had not noticed before that Bartimaeus says, "My teacher."
Hmm?
Places a claim on Jesus, whatever teachings he'd had before. Now this is his teacher.
Right. And I mean, the Jewish would be rabbi. So he says to him, "My rabbi." Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Helen in the chat has pointed out as well that it's a bit odd that Jesus says to Bartimaeus, so I can't see it all, it says to Bartimaeus, come to me, when he's a blind person. And at other times, let me just read what you've written, especially as Jesus has gone to others at different times. So is there something in that? I mean, there certainly is. It sounds interesting. What might that be about? Put your best gospel genre hats on, Colin.
Was it lost my words now. I've lost it.
Maybe it means that even when we cannot see where we're going or fully understand where Jesus is, we are still welcome to come to him. He still calls us to come to him.
Yes, what was a blindness of faith, not actually his sight?
Yes, good. Yes, I mean that's a great question, Colin. Absolutely. I mean, remember we all through the Gospels as we've journeyed with all of these healing stories. When we've spoken about people being deaf, we've been saying this isn't just a deafness of an ear not working. Is it a spiritual deafness, perhaps, that represents an inability to really hear what is happening? Or is this blindness an inability to actually, to recognize the presence of God or what God is doing?
Just picking up on what Kate said there in the chat, is there a parallel here with the man lowered down through the roof where he says, pick up your bed and walk? In the sense, in both cases, he's almost saying in the call, you're cured, come.
Yeah. Yeah, Jim, they're both healing stories, and they both get healed of the thing that is the biggest problem that they have in their lives. Yeah. But what is that problem for Bartimaeus?
Blind. He wants to see.
Yes.
Jesus
and some more. Yeah, I can see if we read the story straight in front of us, if we were just reading a biography of Bartimaeus, we would say he was blind, his eyes didn't work, now his eyes see. But actually we're reading gospel writing, and Mark has crafted the story to help us understand who Jesus is, what it means to follow him, what it means for us to be disciples. So what might this blindness of Bartimaeus represent?
Well, in the previous few chapters, we've had Peter having some insight and then losing it. And we've had a lack of insight from the disciples about what it means to be the Messiah and what it means to follow Jesus. And now here is a beggar, somebody begging, pleading to be able to perceive, to see more clearly who Jesus is and what it means to follow.
I think he wants a new life. I think he wants a new life because that blanket was a begging blanket. His whole life was one of begging and horror. And the people around him aren't saying, here's Jesus, he might make you see again. They haven't really thought that Jesus is going to change the man, but he sees this possibility, a complete change of his life.
Yes, but Bartimaeus used to be able to see, because he says, sorry, change my glasses again. He says to him, teacher, let me see again. So he could see, but something has happened to him that he has not lost perhaps his physical sight, but he has lost his way on his spiritual way, and he's desperate to regain it. And by throwing off the cloak, he's throwing off that which has held him back, which he's clung to as a sort of safety blanket, and is wanting that new start again.
That's lovely, Elizabeth. Yes. That for me brings some of the gospel aspects of it, the gospel writing style, genre and style aspects of it to life. So yes, I mean, there's a parallel in the story. He throws off this blanket is it a coat? Is it a blanket that he has, and follows Jesus on the way. And in that moment, he leaves behind everything that he had that was security. The only things we know that he had and that was security, and he follows Jesus on the way. Was it just last week? There was this man who we eventually worked out owned a whole lot of stuff. And the one thing he couldn't do was leave that behind to follow Jesus on the way. So actually, Bartimaeus is perhaps the reverse of that story in some ways. I see a few comments about Jericho. I'll come back to Jericho. Well, let me just say quickly about Jericho. So Jericho was sort of always the last stop, sort of down the hill from Jerusalem. And if you want a pilgrimage, you would make your way to Jericho and then up the hill to Jerusalem. And that meant a couple of things. It meant that actually, if you were wealthy enough to go on a pilgrimage, you probably had lots of money in your pockets. And so this was the road that Luke tells us where the bandits always head out to grab people and rob them. You know that story from Luke, eh? But it also meant that actually it was a good place for beggars, because actually, if you want a pilgrimage, you're going for on a religious journey, you're probably the religious kind who will probably be, at least at that time, well disposed towards beggars. And so probably historically, there were both bandits and beggars along the road. Yeah.
Bartimaeus
Adrian, that I submit is Peter. I think that misses the point. For me, this has always been perhaps the classic example where chapters and verses get in the way. Okay. Because that sentence, they came to Jericho, is like the title of a chapter, because nothing happens in Jericho. Bartimaeus is outside. Everybody who heard this gospel read would know that Jericho was the stop before Jerusalem. Right. So why has Mark put it there? He's put it there to say, here is the essence of the rest of the gospel. Passion Week, the crucifixion. Right. Because the walls are about to fall down. Right. And that can be in one of two senses. The walls are no longer there, so this can't be physical. I'm not here to fight the battle of Jericho. I'm a Prince of Peace. But it can also mean the walls that are stopping you recognizing that I am of God are also going to collapse. Okay. Bartimaeus calls him Son of David to make it crystal clear that here is Messiah.
I agree with much of what you're saying. Okay, yes, and really there's a key point there that this is the start of something completely different. This is the Jericho moment. They come to Jericho. This is close enough, like arriving in Jerusalem. From here, it's trouble, actually, you know. And Bartimaeus is sort of a summary story of discipleship, because he's the rich man who's left everything behind. He's the blind man who's had his eyes open, the rich man who wouldn't leave everything behind. He's not like that. He's the blind man or the other people who've been healed. He's everyone who hasn't followed Jesus on the way. Here is Bartimaeus, who leaves everything behind and follows Jesus on the way. But where does he follow Jesus on the way to? He follows Jesus on the way into Jerusalem, which is on the way to the cross and the passion and the heart of what this is all about. Yeah. That is a a rejection of the messianic story, son of David. Okay, what follows from here is the exact opposite. It's not Jesus going in and chasing the Romans out. It's Jesus going in and laying down his life in a Mosaic kind of way, you know. So it's the final sort of repudiation of that son of David Messiah image. Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
Bartimaeus won't let the noisy pilgrims, which there must have been a huge crowd of pilgrims from Jericho to Jerusalem for Passover. He doesn't let all that distracting clamor and noise get in the way of what he wants. He keeps on growing louder and louder until he's heard.
What does he want, Margaret? There's that question.
New life.
No. What's the question that's put to him?
What do you want me to do for you?
What do you want me to do for you? That's another story line that echoes from the previous story. When Jesus asks the disciples, he says to the disciples exact same words, what do you want me to do for you? And the disciples say, oh, we want fame and glory and first and second in the kingdom, which is not a really very good disciple answer. When Bartimaeus gets asked, what do you want me to do for you? He just says, I want to see again. As his words say, I want to see again. Gospel eyes. I want to see with gospel eyes. I want to understand Jesus. I want to know God again.
But it would have given him new life, a completely changed life. It's a transformation.
It is a transformation, but now tell me, what is that transformation? What is it from and what is it to?
From darkness to light.
It's from not being a disciple to being a disciple.
Yeah.
From doubt
and
to
what was
faith.
Bartimaeus' experience of not being a disciple?
Outcome.
Selfish.
Blindness.
Blindness, yes.
Poverty.
What caused his blindness?
It's lack of faith.
What represents that in the story?
Cloak.
No.
His eyes.
No. Well.
Jesus said your faith has cured you.
No.
His lack of understanding and lack of faith.
Yes, go on. His previous life, yes. What is it about his previous life? What did Adrian spend 2 slides explaining to you before we read the passage?
It was all about himself in the past. Now it's going to be all about Jesus.
No.
Is it to do with honor and shame?
It's always to do with honor and shame, but that's not the specific thing here.
Is it to do with the Greek influence?
The Greek influence? Yes, go on, Anne.
Was he, this is about Jesus confronting the Greek influence.
Which appears in this story how?
By these names, this name.
Which name?
Bartimaeus.
Bartimaeus, yes. Yes, Bartimaeus is so lost and blind because he is sold out to the story of the Timaeus. His entire way of thinking, his philosophy of life, he's just son of Timaeus. That's all there is to him. He's just about the Timaeus. And that is, instead of bringing him wisdom, that is what brings him that is what makes him blind. Let me share screen with you quickly.
At the beginning.
Yeah, go on.
At the beginning of the gospel, our first healing in Capernaum with the unclean spirit. The people were amazed at Jesus's teaching. Here, he is now confronting the teaching of the Greeks, which is prevalent at the time, the latest fad, what people are following. But Jesus' teaching, his lifestyle, is far, far superior, demanding.
Yeah.
it bookends the gospel.
So the Timaeus bookends. We started talking about it, we're back talking about it. Plato writes this his most famous work, The Republic. And what the Republic is it's a snapshot of what the perfect world, the perfect town, the perfect society will be like. Plato says, this is it. The Republic is the perfect place. It's like, well, he probably might have used the words, it's like heaven. But actually in the Timaeus, he refers to it and he says it's like Atlantis. And we've all heard of Atlantis, eh? You might have heard of Atlantis. Atlantis was this mythical, perfect place, which was just, everything was perfect until one day it just sank under the sea and it was gone. That was Atlantis. You've heard about it, eh? And the Timaeus says that perfect world, Atlantis, is lost and it will never be found again. It goes on to say, we are blind and it's only a few enlightened philosophers that can really see, understand in gospel language. The Timaeus says only philosophers can understand what truth is. And the reason they can understand it is because they see that this world is fallen, imperfect, and without a hope. And then the Timaeus goes on and makes a hard separation between this world, which is changing and physical, and an eternal world that is perfect and spiritual. Those are the four key things that I want to highlight. There's a lot more, but those are the four key things that the Timaeus says. I'm going to just go through them again. The perfect world was Atlantis, now lost, never to be found. We are blind, only a few people can see and understand. Only philosophers understand what truth is, and that's because they see the world is fallen, imperfect, and hopeless. Timaeus makes a hard separation between the changing physical world and the eternal perfect world. Those are the four tenets on which our blind beggar builds his life. The world will never be perfect again. There's nothing you can understand about it. Pessimism is truth. The world is fallen, imperfect, and hopeless. And this world can have nothing more than a fleeting and superficial resemblance to what is perfect. And Bartimaeus has said yes to all of that. And in saying yes to all of that, he finds himself as someone who's got nothing to give to anyone else, as someone who is desperate, hoping that others will give something to him. And he looks at Jesus and he realizes, hang on, I want to see again. I want to give up on my Timaeus thoughts, for want of a better word. Oops, sorry. And I want to give up on that Timaeus philosophy and embrace this philosophy that Jesus has. Does that make sense? Does that paint a picture of why Bartimaeus is described as blind? And why Bartimaeus is described as a beggar?
Yes, it gives us another insight into the story that we have known so well for many years. But it also shows what good news Jesus was preaching and proclaiming, if the prevalent thought at that time was that, Greek thinking, how lost the people were, how if pessimism, nothing will change, nothing is perfect, and Jesus is coming with hope and resurrection and life and light and on all of this.
So I want to split you into groups now, just groups of about 5, and James will just magic you into those and you just need to click yes and go to your groups. And in your groups, I'll try to put those notes into the groups as well, so that you've got them in front of you. And I just invite you to have a conversation about if that Bartimaeus imagery is blind beggary that he's putting behind him, then what picture at this hinge moment in the gospel does it, what is the summary, the real summary then of what the good news is that Jesus is bringing to the world? Does that make sense? How do we understand the gospel if this is especially not the gospel? Is that okay? All right, James, can you do your thing?
Rooms are open now, yeah. People should be invited to rooms. You should all have a invitation to join a breakout room. So you're joining now, so just click on join and yeah. Do you want me to put that message in the broadcast, that message, Adrian?
Do it. I think I can do it, can I? Do you need to send it to the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I can do that. So,
okay, so there it is. You can just cut and paste it from what I've sent you now then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll do it. That's going now.
Thank you.
And how long would you like them to have in the breakout rooms? I'll broadcast that at the same time.
So about 6 minutes. I suppose 6 minutes plus a minute.
There we are. That's all gone now.
Yeah.
Although there's a timer on the breakout rooms and it says 3 minutes to go, so we might need to I don't think I can extend it.
Let's see what happens with that. I'm struggling to see. Is Trisha here with us, or is she gone?
She's put in.
That's fine. That would explain why I can't see her. Okay, that's fine.
I'm sure. Unfortunately, yeah.
Okay.
So the perfect world is lost, never to be established again. Pessimism is truth. We cannot understand. The world is fallen, imperfect, and hopeless. This world can have nothing more than a fleeting and superficial resemblance to what is perfect.
Yeah. It really, I mean, if that's, it's really just a simple exercise of saying, well, what is the opposite of that? Actually, the perfect world can be established. The kingdom of God is coming. And we can know that, and we can understand it. And pessimism is not realism. Optimism is realism. Because the world is not without hope. And what is perfect can be established or re-established among us. You know.
I think it's also the idea you're saying about knowledge is only available to a select few. Because didn't that appear in the in some of sort of after? Didn't Paul address some of that? Where
Yes.
some, you know,
Yeah. It was. I mean, a lot of this Timaeus Platonic thinking sort of was driving the Middle East, the Roman Empire at the time. It was the culture really that took hold in the thinking that took hold in the Roman Empire. So when Paul traveled through the Roman Empire, often he was speaking to Greek culture and into Greek culture and responding to things like this. Yeah, and one of those things is this sort of, the Greeks would have liked it, I suppose. I kind of want to say this almost democratization of spirituality. There wasn't just something that was in the hands of the priests and you had to ask the priest to handle this for you or to do that for you or whatever. That somehow actually in Jesus we are now able to reach out and to communicate and understand and know God directly without the collar guy or the priest having to intervene for us, without someone else needing to explain it all for us.
Yeah.
Is that the 3 minutes up?
They've got another minute, or they're coming back now.
Okay,
So
that's fine. That's fine.
is that long enough?
No, that's perfectly fine. We'll leave it there.
I apologise. That was not 6 minutes. I opened the rooms and then it's like, oh, you've got 4 minutes to go. I can't change it. Sorry about that.
It's only 2 minutes. Okay.
Never mind.
I hope you got your conversations done.
I thought we got more than 2 minutes there, actually.
Was it enough time?
There was enough time,
Yes.
yeah.
Mute everybody, Adrian, and then I'll mute you.
Okay. I was just about to say everyone's taken the chance to go home. The story tells us, the gospel tells us, that the perfect world is not lost, that the kingdom of God is coming and will be established on earth as it is in heaven. And you can know that and you can understand it and you can be a part of it. And pessimism isn't realism, optimism is realism, because the world is full of hope. And this world can be perfect. It's not sold out to its brokenness and its emptiness. Is there anything else you thought of that you particularly want to share from your groups?
Adrian, was
Yes.
there anything about Jesus bringing a more personal relationship, whereas the Greek was this Atlantis, this corporate thing that Bartimaeus was called as an individual?
Often the individuals within the Gospels are representative of a whole group of people. So it's not necessarily that we understand Bartimaeus as one person. Perhaps Bartimaeus is representative of all the philosophers, or Bartimaeus is representative of all the sons of Timaeus, that sort of thing. But there is something in it, in that the Timaeus certainly promoted this idea that only the philosophers could see, that there was an elite class who understood and knew and really understood everything, and everyone else could never understand and was irrelevant. And certainly by Bartimaeus throwing off the Timaeus in this story that Mark tells us, there's also this image that actually it's no longer that people have to go to the experts to know about spiritual things, have to go to the priest to connect with God, have to go to the philosopher to get insight. No, people can know, and people can know God without other intermediaries handling in between. Yeah. So who pointed out to us that this is the start in some ways, not exactly, but in some ways, this is the start of Holy Week. All right. This is where it begins. Okay. And as such, here's another little hinge in the story where Mark is wanting for you to remember everything that's gone before, every bit of healing, every bit of confrontation with the powers, all of that. He wants you to bring that all to mind. And in this, what is this last sort of discipleship healing episode, or this Hinge discipleship healing episode, he wants you to remember that we need to struggle against these things that make us deaf and mute. And it's only if we renounce our thirst for power that the disciples had. It's only if we recognize our own blindness. It's only when we actually come and ask for our ears to be open and we're willing to listen deeply and listen in a new way. It's only when we reject the inadequate foundations, our own Timeuses on which we've built our lives, our own philosophies. It's only in doing all of that that we will be open to this true discipleship. And like Bartimaeus, we can leave everything behind and follow Jesus on the way. Follow Jesus on the way into discipleship. That's what Bartimaeus gets for throwing everything off. He gains his sight, and what he gets is to follow Jesus into Jerusalem, where he's going to witness the Last Supper and the crucifixion and all those sort of things. And he's going to find that the cross is at the center of true wisdom. Can we go on? I know we spent ages on it, but I really think this is it's a beautiful piece of gospel writing. There is so much more in it than we've unpacked already, and also it's just a crucial discipleship moment to actually say, this is where we are in the story. So we're going to go on, and we're going to move quite quickly for the rest of the evening because, gosh, else we'll never get anywhere. That's my excuse anyway. So if I share screen with you there, and we're now at chapter 11. All right, can you see that? So when they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, Jesus, sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Just say this, the Lord needs it. We'll send it back here immediately. They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, what are you doing? Untying the colt. And they told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they'd cut in the fields. And then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he'd looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. What do we call this story? Anyone?
Triumphal entry.
The triumphal entry. I mean, everyone knows this is the triumphal entry, except actually, it's only in verse 11 that he enters Jerusalem. And there's not that much triumphal about it. It is undoubtedly a story that brings to mind this idea of a military procession, of a triumphal nationalistic David riding the crowd, marching on Jerusalem, proclaiming, this is our leader, that sort of thing. And the march begins, we saw it near the Mount of Olives. And that's not just geography, that's the apocalyptic tradition telling us that was the place where the final battle against Israel's enemies in the defense of Israel would take place. You can read it, Zechariah 14, verses 2-4. He says, when the final defense of Jerusalem happens, that's going to be the key place. Okay, so perhaps this is the key story in the final defense of what Israel is really all about. Simon Maccabeus had a few hundred years before, he'd led a successful military revolt, which had brought a short period of independence for Israel. And there's a bit of that brought into the story with the waving of the palms and that sort of thing. They said, as he entered Jerusalem with praise and palm branches and with hymns and songs. You can read that in 1 Maccabees. And then in AD 66, the leader of the Sicarii, the Iscariots, had begun a successful struggle to rid Jerusalem of the Romans. And they led a kingly procession into Jerusalem, even as they were still fighting to capture the Temple Mount. And Josephus writes, Menahem took some of the men of note with him, retired to Masada, broke open Herod's armory, distributed the weapons, and these he made use of for a guard, and returned in the state of a king to Jerusalem, and became leader of the sedition, and gave orders for the continuing siege. When Mark is writing this, it's round about that period. That's if that hasn't just happened, that's some of the thinking and the feeling that is in the culture at the time. So all of those images sort of paint into the story a little bit of what is happening. But at the same time, it doesn't happen, does it? Why is Jesus, Son of Man, rather than Messiah, and really quite anti-Messiah, why is he involved in a parade like this? Because he doesn't end up at the end of the parade being triumphal Messiah, and they put a king on his a crown on his head and make him king.
There's an Old Testament prophecy, isn't it, about riding on a colt? Old Testament prophecy about coming to riding on a colt.
All right, Zechariah. Yeah, Zechariah 9, verses 9, thereabouts, is this prophecy which just ties in with the Son of Man kind of image. It says, actually, when this leader comes to release Israel and to give Israel its real freedom, he's going to come as a man of peace. He's going to come on a silly old donkey again, not on a war horse, not leading a great army. Actually, this is the person. This is how you're going to know this is the real person who's going to set you free. He's not going to come and fight. He's going to come and lead on in peace. Yeah.
So Jesus is making a statement about who he is.
Yes, say some more. Sorry, I didn't see who that was.
John.
Say some more. John Kidd, yes.
Yeah, he's making a statement about who he is. He's coming in as a king, but a different sort of king. He's coming in as the king of peace, riding on the donkey.
Right. And so perhaps there's this double thing happening. It's sort of meant to bring all of this to mind, but at the same time, it's almost as if it's a parody. It's almost as if he's saying it's the exact opposite of that. It's not the war horse king, it's the donkey king who's arriving. And you know what? It's going to mean peace and all of these things that you're hoping for. And there's something in the story that's really odd that kind of points to that as well. And that is the fact that there's so much in the story that is spent on the setup. You know, just have a look at it. I mean, as Mark tells the story, he tells you more about where they were going to find the donkey, what the password was when they took the donkey, who was going to confront them, and the fact that they were then allowed to take the donkey, and that they were then able to take the donkey back to Jesus, and they were able to use it. And there's so much put into the preparation for it that it kind of underlines the possibility of what John is saying, John Kidd is saying, that this is actually a sort of a street parade, which is meant to parody some of what is happening. John Dominic Crossan, who is a Roman Catholic theologian, he suggests that actually there might have been two parades on the day, and actually that coming into Jerusalem from the other side might have been one of the Roman emperors or someone of that sort of importance. And so the two things were sort of held against in tension with each other. Mark doesn't say that explicitly. But he does say that the people who were supporting Jesus and going gaga over Jesus this day were not the people of Jerusalem. They were the people from outside, the people from the fields and, what's his description? From the fields. They were the people who were following Jesus here. They were the people who thought he was wonderful. People of Jerusalem maybe still didn't think he was that great. Perhaps the change that we often hear about from Good Friday, from Palm Sunday to Good Friday, is not so much that everyone's changed their minds. Perhaps it's just a different crowd of people. Perhaps the less fancy, less urban, salt of the earth kind of people were really quite happier to follow Jesus the whole way. But when they got to Jerusalem, they stepped back. And the people who were in the places of power and prestige and privilege in Jerusalem, they were the ones who were saying, not this guy.
What's the significance of the phrase, no one has ever sat on the donkey? That looks like an interesting comment to throw in when Jesus asks his disciples to go and find a colt on which no one has ever sat.
Alan, I think I'm 90% sure that is Mark tying that passage to the Zechariah passage that we mentioned, Zechariah 9 verse 9. And so he uses that language because that is what Zechariah said thousands of years before, and he wants to bring that image to mind. We're not talking history, we're not talking whether the donkey was actually sat on or not sat on. That's neither here nor there, but he wants you to understand that this image relates to that image of Zechariah 9 verse 9. I think that's the crucial part of it.
You had a quick look at Zechariah 9:9, and it doesn't refer to the donkey not being sat on. It seems
that doesn't it?
No, I mean, it could be implied, I guess. I don't know.
I'll have a better look and give you an answer sometime.
Can I suggest
if I can, yeah. Oh.
I was going to say, could I suggest that there is, however, another sort of symbolism in something that hasn't been used? You know, that if stuff was, if things were sacrificial, I mean, if things were special for God, they weren't supposed to be used for other things. So I wonder if there's a little bit of symbolism like that in there. This is
That's
a holy
possible.
donkey.
That's quite possible, yeah. Yeah, like the unblemished lamb or whatever.
Yeah.
What else strikes you out of that story? I know I've also given you a complete different spin to the one you've heard for the last 25 Palm Sundays. Adrian.
Yeah, something that I've spotted. In the past, I was always led to believe that the palm branches were the emblems of the Maccabees. So this was, this put the wind up the Romans, thinking that the Maccabees were coming back to throw them out. But in the translation used today, there's no mention of palm branches.
Yeah, the palm branches are, someone help me, in Luke's gospel. They mentioned in one of the other gospels, but certainly it is a part of the same sort of image that is happening. Here is Jesus coming into Jerusalem on his donkey, and they're coming towards Jerusalem on his donkey, and there are these masses of people who are shouting things like Hosanna, save me, save us, that sort of thing. So even if the palm branches aren't there in this account, certainly the same imagery is there. Yeah.
Isn't there a reference to David entering Jerusalem on a donkey as a sign of humility?
I'm not aware of that, but I'm not saying there isn't.
I think the kings, it was a king's tradition, Jewish kings. The other thing that struck me about this story, it would be a carnival atmosphere. People were all excited. It was a bank holiday Monday sort of thing, feel to it. Ice creams and bands playing. They were all light-hearted. And I wonder sometimes if this story is about Jesus just going to be light-hearted and joyful and be one of the people and to help to raise us, to join in the party.
Until he got, I was with you until you said light-hearted, because I think some of the imagery of liberation and the deep desire for freedom is definitely in the passage. So I could hear that people could hear that as passionate, that the Romans could hear that as threatening. I'm not sure about light-hearted, but I suppose there is something in the passage. There certainly is something about it being a joyous occasion. Finally our hope is here. Finally this thing that we've been waiting for is arriving. So yeah.
But can I sort of put a slightly, well, there's another thing. I mean, this is going on at the time of one of the big festivals, isn't it? So you would expect there to be a lot of people on the road. So, whether Jesus had been there or not, I think that's going back to what Anne was saying about him, it was a sort of special time, but it's not just a special time because Jesus is there. There'd be a lot of people would be there. They were happy to be going to Jerusalem to the festival. And so in a sense,
can I cut in there, Paul? Can I cut in there? It's what you're saying is very John. Okay, actually, there's no mention of the festival here. There's no mention of the Passover, is there?
No.
I don't think so. And certainly, Jesus, Mark doesn't. Mark portrays the crowds are there because Jesus is there.
I mean, Mark does say later. No. Mark does say later there is reference to the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover lamb and things. Admittedly, that's in a couple of chapters' time.
All right. Well,
so, I mean, that's
only a couple of days' time, so that's fine.
Well, exactly, but you know what I'm.
Okay.
Yeah. But that is why I wonder if actually it didn't. At this moment, it wouldn't have spooked the Romans. They just see it's these weirdos all coming up to town to have a party.
Okay.
I don't know.
For the weirdos themselves, though, there definitely is an image of peace and liberation.
Oh, indeed, yes.
That is coming with it. And there is a sense in which actually this weirdo group was not always seen as a threat.
No.
Although, as the story twists and turns further on, there's enough evidence to crucify Jesus, even if it's a bit twisted. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can also say that Hosanna is a form of save us.
You could say Hosanna is, sorry?
Is a form of save us, help us.
Yeah.
Now, if that, to me, this isn't about praise. This is about begging him to come and help them. Now, if blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And if the Romans, who would obviously come in from the other gates on their big war horses, the contrast is that he's been asked to save them, whereas the Romans are forcing them into subjugation. And the kingdom will last forever, but the kingdom of the Romans will not last forever. And it goes back to this Greek philosophy that nothing lasts. And like you said last week, democracy won't last. It just has a form, and then we go on to something else. But the kingdom lasts for everything, forever.
I think I might have said capitalism won't last.
Yes, that's it.
I'm not that hard on democracy. Just
yes, sorry, it is. Yes.
I'm still struggling to see who was talking. I'm like, I've got so many faces in front of me. No, I think that's right, and I think you're cutting us back to the gospel type questions. So what are the key questions? What does this mean? It means that there's a group of people who are looking to Jesus and finding their hope in Jesus, and that Jesus is presenting himself not as the white horse Messiah, but as the donkey son of man. It doesn't sound quite right, but you know what I mean. And this one who is coming with peace. And by the end of the story, it's interesting. After all of that, only in verse 11, Jesus enters Jerusalem and goes into the temple. And then these strange words, he looked around at everything, and because it was late, he left and went to Bethany with the disciples. What was it late for? It's kind of odd, isn't it?
Maybe they had to be somewhere in a town or a village by nightfall.
Curfew, okay.
Curfew, sorry, that's what I meant, yes.
Or was it just too late for the priests and people to change?
Or was it too late to do what Jesus did the next day?
Had he intended doing that day, but he had to go back? I don't know.
So what happens the next day? So they go to Bethany, which is Bethany, which is the house of the poor. That's what it means. And Jesus leaves Jerusalem, the center of power, because it's late, and goes and spends the night in the house of the poor. And let's read on from there. On the following day, when they came to Bethany, from Bethany, he, that's Jesus, was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem. Okay, let's just read it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, forgive. And if you have anything against anyone, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses." So, is this a story about how people get hangry? You know, when you get really hungry, you get really angry. And Jesus is really grumpy that day, and he wants a fig, so he destroys the tree in his anger. Or might there be something else?
Is he not looking at the people in Jerusalem, and particularly the Jews, and seeing that they look very good? They're all sort of shiny and polished on the surface, but there's no fruit there.
Yes, spot on. Sorry, who was that?
Jenny.
Jenny, good, yes. So exactly right, Jenny, except not so much the people of Jerusalem as the temple, as the whole temple institution. And certainly within Jewish writing and within the Old Testament, there are never trees that are not symbolic. But over and again, this image of the fig tree is the image of the temple. And do you remember, is it John's Gospel? Jesus says to one of the disciples, who was it?
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel, thank you. I saw you under the fig tree. Okay. The image, I saw you studying in the temple. Okay. And so here we have this image of actually the temple has run its course. It looks great, doesn't it? Eh? Lots of leaves, lots of big shiny golden marble and whatever else. From a distance, everything looks okay. But when you get up close, there's nothing there. Eh? You're looking for some figs, you're looking for something to eat, you find there's nothing there. And Jesus curses the fig tree. On the fire, so he says to him, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. Okay, it's not, they weren't in the room, and so, you know, they weren't standing next to him and he said something, so they heard it. They really heard it. Okay, and then we have this passage in this in the temple, and then Mark's sandwich on the other end. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. You don't get more dead than withered away to your roots. And Peter looks at it and says, Rabbi, teacher, look, it's died. Jesus answered them, have faith in God. Now, the importance of that, we mustn't miss. Okay, there's some horribly misused verses that come up and all that thing. If you say this mountain, if you don't doubt, and whatever you ask, whatever you say, it'll be done, whatever. If you were Jewish and the temple was withered to its roots and died, that would be just about as big a disaster as you could imagine. This was the center of your religion. This was the place where you found forgiveness. This is where you made offerings to God to sort out all your sin and everything. If this falls apart, gosh, everything falls apart. And so when Peter says to Jesus, this thing has died to its roots, the natural thing, the natural response for Jesus is to say, don't have faith in the temple, have faith in God. Didn't include the first part of the sentence, but that's what he's saying. He's saying, don't worry about that. You need to put your faith in God. And as good Jewish person, your next concern is, but how's this all going to work? Because if I can't find forgiveness here, where am I going to find forgiveness? Verse 24, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've received it and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. It's not that God's got a deal going that if you forgive, he'll forgive or anything. We know it's not like that. It's Jesus moving the center of forgiveness from something that's administered by the priests in the temple to something that happens between you and me in our relationships with each other. And that's where we will find forgiveness, and that's where we will experience forgiveness. And that's why we don't have to have faith in the temple or worry about the destruction of the temple, because have faith in God. We'll start next week and look at what happened in the temple, because we've got 2 minutes left. Anything you want to add or ask? So I haven't really kept up with the chat. If we can't worship in church, don't panic. Have faith in God.
Very good.
Anything else? When I laid out where we were going to get to and how we were going to get through the second half in 6 weeks, I put a little less into next week because I thought if we get behind, we can use next week to catch up. And we're going to use next week to catch up, and we will finish on time and in space and pull everything together. The meeting tomorrow at 12 o'clock, if you can make it, it'll be great to see you there. Bring all your questions and all your insights, and we can have a further discussion. That's in the chat. And otherwise, I will see you all next week. Is there anything I need to add? Tricia, is there anything more to say?
In the chat, do you click on the link again in the chat, or is it something you note down for tomorrow?
I think you're gonna have to note down that meeting ID and passcode.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah.
We've
okay.
done that. Yeah.
Or if you cut and paste the link and kept it as a link, you can paste it somewhere. And then
yeah, I understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Lovely.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Thank you.
Big insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Adrian.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. God bless.
Bye.
God bless everyone.
Bye.
993 is that one. So you can cut and paste that link.
I wrote that down at the beginning.
Yeah, cut and paste. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
Malcolm, don't disappear yet, Malcolm. I want you to tell me what the monument is behind you before you go.
Oh, it's a local monument. A folly.
I know. I'm just trying to see if I can cut and paste it, like you said.
Yeah.